Welcome to the Institute for Strategic Policy Solutions. My name is Kimberly Jackson, and I am the Executive Director of what we like to call ISPS. We're so honored this evening to host the Sixth Circuit Judicial Forum, which we get to showcase and highlight candidates who are seeking your vote for the Judicial Circuit. Tonight, I'm honored to tell you about our moderator, but before I do, I'd really like to discuss briefly what ISPS stands for. The Institute was the brainchild of Congressman Bill Young. Congressman Bill Young wanted to create a think tank in which we could convene the community and have topics of conversation in a nonpartisan way on civic discussion, on political, social, and economic issues. In short, he wanted to enhance, engage, and educate the community on issues that impact all of us and really talk about the scope of government. We invite you to learn more about the Institute on our Facebook page, and thank you for joining us for ISPS. I am personally honored at this time to introduce Attorney Christina Thayer. Christina Thayer is the moderator this evening for the Florida Association for Women Lawyers Board of Directors Fall. She served as a chapter representative representing Pinellas County on the Fall Board of Directors for 2019-2020. She also served as president of the Pinellas County chapter of the Florida Association for Women Lawyers from 2018 to 2019. She serves on the Sixth Circuit Grievance Committee, among others, and she previously served as the Sixth Circuit representative for the Florida Bar Young Lawyers Division Board of Governors. In 2019, Christina received the Sixth Judicial Circuit Pro Bono Award and the Community Law Program Volunteer of the Year Award. Finally, among her other roles, she is also an adjunct professor for St. Petersburg College's Paralegal Studies program. We look forward to a robust debate, Christina, and thank you again for hosting. Take it away.
Good evening, everyone. I am Christina Thayer, and I will be acting as moderator of this virtual forum. I want to thank the Institute for Strategic Policy Solutions for hosting this forum. The forum is facilitated by the League of Women Voters of the St. Petersburg area and North Pinellas County. This forum is co-sponsored by the St. Petersburg Metropolitan section of the National Council of Negro Women, Gulfcoast Legal Services, and the Community Law Program. The League of Women Voters is celebrating 100 years of informing voters and defending democracy. Please consider joining us in the work that we do to encourage voter registration and to provide nonpartisan information to the public. Information about the League of Women Voters is available on our websites. Tonight, we have two candidates from Group 28 of the Sixth Circuit and two candidates from Group 44 of the Sixth Circuit. Everyone voting in Pinellas and Pasco Counties will choose one person from each group. Our candidates are Evan Frayman for Group 28, Eva Vergos for Group 28, Elizabeth Liz Jack for Group 44, and Ashley Ward-Signleton for Group 44. Each candidate will have 1 minute for opening remarks and 2 minutes for closing remarks. After they make their opening remarks, I will be asking the candidates questions, and they will have 1 minute to respond to the question. I will also be asking the candidates lightning round questions, which will require only a word or two answer. Since we are in a virtual format and live tonight, we're unable to take questions from the audience during the forum. The Judicial Code of Conduct, Canon 7, explicitly limits the topics and areas which a candidate for the judiciary can discuss during his or her campaign. For example, candidates are not allowed to discuss their political views or comment on whether they agree or disagree with laws enacted by the legislature. All questions have been screened in an effort to ensure compliance with Canon 7. If any candidate believes that a question violates Canon 7, he or she should so indicate, and I will decide whether the question should be withdrawn. Please note that the views expressed by the candidates do not represent those of the League of Women Voters or of this forum's host and co-sponsors. The order of the candidates' opening and closing remarks was determined by drawing straws. So opening statements We'll begin with candidate Vergos.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Eva Vergos, and I am running for Circuit Court Judge here in the 6th Circuit for Pinellas and Pasco Counties. A little bit about myself. I have been practicing here in the 6th Circuit as a prosecutor for over 18 and a half years now. As a prosecutor, I have prosecuted hundreds of cases. I have tried over 100 cases. I have spent my career in the courtroom bringing justice to people who have been wronged in some fashion. I spent over a decade of my work in the Special Victims Unit, working with children who have been victims of child abuse and molestation. I am running for Circuit Court Judge because I want to continue providing the services to the 6th Circuit. I want to continue giving back to this circuit who has given me so much. And I look forward to learning more about you and you learning more about me and gaining your vote during the course of this debate. Thank you.
Thank you, candidate Vergos. Next, candidate Jack.
Thanks. My name is Elizabeth Liz Jack on the ballot. I've been an attorney 22 years. I'm a single mom of 2. I only have the life and work experience needed in our circuit judges. Circuit judges must have extensive courtroom and trial experience to be effective and efficient. I'm the only candidate in my group who has that experience. I've been a prosecutor more than a dozen years with daily courtroom experience in front of many different judges. I have more than 50 jury trials, more than 300 bench trials, and thousands of serious hearings and motions. My opponent has tried one case to verdict and has limited courtroom experience. I also have experience in family law and psychology, and I've brought services to families in the dependency system. I know how to run a courtroom, and I know how to select services and improve procedures within the courtroom. And experience is what protects all of our rights as citizens. Thank you.
Thank you, candidate Jack. Next, candidate Frayman.
Thank you, Christina, and thank you to our hosts. I spent 25 years in practice building my experience to prepare me for this role as a circuit court judge, and I'm asking you for your vote on August 18th. I'm the only candidate in my race who has substantive experience in all of the areas of law in which a circuit judge has responsibility. That's not just criminal, it includes civil, family, juvenile, and probate. I'm not a career prosecutor. I'm not a career defense attorney or a plaintiff's lawyer. There's no label that sits on me because I've spent my entire career working on both sides of the V, establishing a track record of knowing how to objectively evaluate a case. I have specific training as a mediator, which is as a neutral, which will assist me in playing that neutral role as a judge in a case. Beyond all of that legal experience, I also have the volunteer work in my community in leadership positions through Leadership Pinellas, volunteering at the Pinellas County Office of Human Rights, Circuit Club president, and working regularly with the Bar Association as its treasurer and volunteering in all of its activities. A judge has to be more than just a person in a courtroom. They have to be involved and invested in their community. Please vote for me on August 18th.
Thank you, candidate Frayman. And next, candidate Ward-Signleton.
Good evening. My name is Ashley Ward-Signleton, and I'm running for Circuit Court Judge to continue my life of service to the residents of Pinellas and Pasco Counties. As a native of Pinellas County, service has just been part of my life and part of who I am. Dating back to as a child, serving this community through being in Girl Scouts and student government and at All Children's Hospital. And I even continued my service while at Florida State University. After attending FSU, I came back to this area to continue to serve by working at the Department of Veterans Affairs. After leaving the VA, I went to Stetson College of Law, where I obtained my Juris Doctorate and my Master's of Business Administration, which gives me a very diverse professional background. Professionally, I've represented plaintiffs and defendants, individuals and businesses. And this type of background serves to enhance the entire judiciary. I've also clerked for a judge, and in addition to being a practicing attorney, I'm also an adjunct professor of trial advocacy at Stetson College of Law, where I'm helping to bring in the next generation of attorneys. And I'm asking for your vote on August 18th, 2020.
Thank you, candidates, for your introductions. Next, let's get into the questions. We're going to start the first question with candidate Frayman. Candidate Freeman, name 3 traits that you have which you feel will make you a good judge.
Respect for just about everybody I know in one manner or another, taking people where they come from. Patience and civility, probably the top 3. I could go on. I like to talk about terms of integrity and humility as well. These are all really important. And I think that I embody what most people consider the critical character of somebody who should be serving on our judiciary. So I think that's some of my answer.
Thank you, candidate Frayman. Next, candidate Jack.
First of all, I have the trial and courtroom experience that are necessary for our circuit judges to rule effectively. Our caseloads in this circuit are massive, and we need judges who are trial ready to make decisions correctly. Also, I'm very open-minded. I like to hear all the facts before making a decision. I don't jump to conclusions, and I think as a judge that will serve me well. I won't make up my mind and then fill in through what I believe. And also, I believe I'm self-reflective, and I try to be. I try to look at my own biases. We all have them. And so that I can determine what is about me and what is about a particular case. And I have years of experience doing that as a prosecutor, so that I'm able to separate myself from my decisions and follow the law. Thank you.
Thank you, candidate Jack. Next, candidate Vergos.
Thank you. I believe that 3 of my most important traits that I would take with me to the bench are the ability to listen. I believe that when people come into a circuit court or into any court, they are facing some of the most challenging times of their lives, and they need someone to listen to them. And my ability to listen is superb. I have spent 18 and a half years listening to people come and tell me about the worst moment of their life. And I intend to take that ability and take it with me to the bench. I also have a respect level for the litigants and the people that are in front of me, or that would be in front of me, that I believe would be necessary for the proper temperament and the proper decorum of the room. The courtroom is something that I have learned, or I have loved for my entire career, and that respect of the courtroom would be something that would stay with me. The last thing that I would like to talk about is my patience. I am a mom to an 8-year-old boy, and anyone who has an 8-year-old boy knows how important patience is. But very much like being a mom, being in the courtroom and handling the different things that are going on in the courtroom would require patience. And patience is something that I intend to take with me to the bench. Thank you so much.
Thank you, candidate Vergos. Finally, candidate Ward-Signleton.
Thank you. The first trait I would say is objectivity. Having represented both plaintiffs and defendants and worked behind the scenes with a federal judge, I've gained the ability to really look at all sides of a case and look at things objectively, which I think is essential to the role as a judge. And then secondly, just professionalism and making sure that you're prepared. You've thoroughly gone through everything, and my preparation is I think what will assist me on the bench. And then finally, being even-tempered, especially at the circuit level, these cases can be very emotional. There is a lot at stake at the circuit court level, and the parties are often very emotional. So the judge has to be even-tempered and neutral, and also not rule based on emotion either, and really just apply the facts to the law. So those would be my 3 traits that I think serve me well on the bench.
Thank you, candidate Ward-Signleton. Our second question will start with candidate Ward-Signleton. Briefly describe a matter in which you represented a client and you were very proud of the result of the case.
Yes, recently I actually just represented a matter where homeowner, they almost lost their home due to Hurricane Irma. But during the litigation process, the spouse of the party, her husband died. She was a younger woman in her 30s with 4 young children. So now not only is she trying to protect her children and keeping a roof over their head, but also dealing with the loss of her husband and the father of her children. But due to, again, the professionalism and the relationships I maintain with opposing counsel, we were able to come up with a favorable resolution for this client so that way she could protect her family.
Thank you, candidate Ward-Signleton. Next, candidate Frayman.
The one that comes to mind is a very disputed family law case that I was involved with where I was helping a father maintain a relationship with his children. And unfortunately, he has actually since passed away at a very young age. And I can only think how much different the remaining years of his life would have been if he had been deprived of that relationship. And what's interesting about that case is I was also very proud of the way we handled it because the opposing party was pro se, and there was no steamrolling of legislation. The court and myself as the opposing counsel were both very sensitive to the issues relating to a pro se party, and we made sure that the outcome was fair to everyone, and I think it was the right outcome, and I was very proud to be involved with it.
Thank you, candidate Frayman. Next, candidate Jack.
I do a lot of white collar, unlicensed contracting and work on behalf of elderly victims. And I've had a case recently involving a 93-year-old blind woman who lived alone and hired a licensed contractor to do work on her home. The person that was sent out ended up writing the checks for her and basically depleted her savings or her entire checking account and all of her financial security. By prosecuting the case and going the extra mile, because it was harder given that the person was licensed, I was able to help get a restitution, get services for her, have her apply to a state fund to provide additional restitution to her, and just in a holistic way give her support that she otherwise wouldn't have had if she hadn't come into contact with the criminal justice system. Thank you.
Thank you, candidate Jack. And finally, candidate Vergos.
Several years ago, a 15-year-old girl called her best friend and got her best friend and her best friend's father to come pick her up from her house after sneaking out. The father, who ended up being my defendant in a case, then took this 15-year-old girl back to his house, where he ultimately provided her with a number of over-the-counter medications and then subsequently methadone. She overdosed and died on his couch the next morning. The family of that young girl didn't even know that she was out of the house before they got the call letting them know that she was being transported to the hospital. That case took approximately 4 years to get through to a trial because of how contentious the litigation was. And ultimately, I did try that case. We were able to convict that defendant with aggravated manslaughter of a child. And recently, the Second District Court of Appeals affirmed that conviction, which was a very important and very successful moment in my career.
Thank you, candidate Vergos. The next question will start with candidate Vergos. What do you believe is the greatest obstacle to ensuring that people receive just treatment and results in the courts? And what would you do to handle this problem in your courtroom?
I believe the greatest obstacle is financial in nature. A lot of people don't have the means to get to the courtroom, to get their case in front of a court, whether it is a civil case that requires a filing fee or a criminal case that requires a defense attorney. As far as what I can do is afford the parties that are in my courtroom the necessary resources, or to at least give them the available resources that are present for them so that this way they can be heard. Because again, these are issues that are the most important issues to people when they're coming into a circuit court. They're issues involving family and finances and freedom, and they have to have the ability to get to that room. Thank you so much.
Thank you, candidate Vergos. Next, candidate Ward-Signleton.
I think one of the biggest obstacles that litigants face is their perception of the judiciary. And I think there's a fear when getting into the judicial system of they're feeling like they're not going to be heard or feeling like they're not being represented. And so I think that is a big challenge, that there needs to be a change in the perception and the connection between the judiciary and the community. And one of the ways that we can do that is ensuring that the law is being applied consistently and fairly to everyone, and that everyone is feeling like they've had their day in court and they've had the ability to be heard.
Thank you, candidate Ward-Signleton. Next, candidate Frayman.
Thank you. I think the greatest obstacle to justice is the lack of consistency and transparency in the process of decision making and the outcomes. When we have different courtrooms rendering different results on effectively the same set of facts, it makes it very difficult for people to trust in the impartiality of the judicial system. And in order for us to do better by them, we need to promote more transparency, more consistency in decision making. We need to root out implicit bias as it exists. We need to root out structural bias as it exists, and just do a better job overall of trying to ensure justice.
Thank you, candidate Frayman. And finally, candidate Jack.
Thanks. I would agree that lack of consistency is within individual courtrooms denies different litigants access to justice or equal justice. But I would attribute that to the experience in judges and a lack of courtroom experience. It takes years and thousands of cases of making those decisions to hone the skills of a judge and to know how to recognize and remove one's own biases in decision making in order to be consistent, predictable, and just follow the law, so that attorneys can prepare their cases and go into the courtroom knowing what to expect. They can advise their clients what to expect. That's one of the things that's motivated me to run for judge. Is I don't think attorneys should be bending their creative skills around the judge's predilections. And I do believe it is necessary for judges to have years of courtroom experience to develop the skills to be predictable and consistent under the law.
Thank you, candidate Jack. For the next question, we will start with candidate Jack. What is the greatest challenge that you have faced in your professional life?
Well, as an attorney, I would say that, as a prosecutor, we have massive caseloads. And I have a great 110 every case and give the time and attention needed to every case, every victim, all of the preparation. Over years of time, I've developed the ability to know what's important, know what deserves time and preparation, and know where I can put my energy best. And again, it's a situation that takes years of courtroom experience to know what's going to be important and what's not. When there are new attorneys in the courtroom, new litigators, they're preparing absolutely everything under the sun, and that's a difficult place to be. I think I've gotten very efficient in my ability to make decisions. Thank you.
Thank you, Candidate Jack. Next, Candidate Vergos.
Caseload that Ms. Jack just spoke of is certainly something that most prosecutors have to deal with, and being able to maintain the balance of that caseload and to give each of those cases their due respect is important, and it is challenging. I will say, however, that one of the most challenging things in my career is learning to evaluate the facts and the evidence of each case for what they are each independently worth, and to rely on my own set of standards that are used applying the law in front of me to make those decisions. I believe that a lot of people think that prosecutors just all act in accordance with each other, and that's not true. As a prosecutor, I have pushed back on my own office a number of times. I have sought the guidance of my office for years, and I believe both of those have allowed me to become the person here today and allowed me to have the experience and the knowledge to take that forward onto a circuit court bench. Thank you.
Thank you, Candidate Vergos. Next, Candidate Ward-Signleton.
A couple of challenges that I've faced in my career have been one, also managing a heavy caseload. I'm presently at a firm where we've got over 800 cases, and dealing with individuals and their lives and their homes and their injuries and all of that on a day-to-day basis. And again, knowing where to prioritize, knowing what needs to be filed to move the cases along and what hearings need to be set. And additionally, I'm often in court dealing with dispositive motions and dealing with other very significant matters that are in the courtroom, but also challenging myself to learn other practice areas. Not only have I done personal injury and property damage claims, I've also done employment law and harassment and wage and hour violations. And so knowing that I can learn new areas of law and new aspects would also be essential, and I welcome that challenge as a judge.
Thank you, Candidate Ward-Signleton. And finally, Candidate Frayman.
Thank you. I think the single most challenging professional issue I had was probably the financial crisis of 2009, experiencing that on the private side of the practice of law and seeing the devastation that it wrought on our firm and our practice, and the efforts that we had to undertake to restructure compensation plans, manage cash flow and business affairs, things that, things you had to do in order to make sure that your staff got their payroll checks every Friday, even if it meant the attorneys took a pass every now and then. It's something that if you haven't experienced as a private lawyer, you may experience one in time, because we go through ebbs and flows with the financial markets. But government lawyers don't ever experience that. They get their paycheck from the state every month. And so I think for me to really see that experience and go through that experience, it taught me something that I think will be invaluable on the bench in terms of respect for the private bar, respect for people who are, having a bad day sometimes when they come before the court.
Thank you, Candidate Freeman. For the next question, we'll start with Candidate Freeman. Why did you become a lawyer?
Well, I took a class in college called the Supreme Court in Constitutional Development. It was a government class at Dartmouth College, and it was just an eye-opener. And I That's when I learned, about all the old Supreme Court cases, the ones that we don't spend a lot of time talking about, the Marbury versus Madison, that's that type of thing. And I just fell in love with it from an academic perspective. And it was just something I knew was the right thing for my mind and for my practice. And obviously, between the intellectual side of it and the service side of it, just helping people, you couldn't have asked for a better combination of things that go along with my personality. It excites my brain and excites my passion for service.
Thank you, candidate Frayman. Next, candidate Jack.
Thank you. I have always cared since I was a little kid about justice and fairness and that the rules are followed. And I was the kid who would fight for that in the schoolyard. It took me a little while to find the law. I tried some other things first, but I became a paralegal to see if I'd enjoy it, and I absolutely fell in love. I worked for a sole proprietor who taught me the ropes and mentored me, and I fell in love with the idea that you could have rules and structure, be very creative within those rules and structure. So once I started law school, I realized I'd found my home. It was a calling, and I'd always been driven by a sense of purpose in my job. It's never been about money. It's never been about prestige. It's been about serving the public. And the law never gets dull. You're always learning new things. Every single case is different. So it allows me to feel fulfilled as well as intellectually challenged. And it's a practice for a lifetime. Thank you.
Thank you, candidate Jack. Next, candidate Vergos.
I became a lawyer to be a voice for people who couldn't have their own voice at that moment. When I was 17 years old, I walked into a courtroom as part of a high school internship program in my senior year of high school and watched a seasoned prosecutor prosecute a homicide of a small child. And I fell in love. I fell in love with the courtroom. I fell in love with prosecution. I fell in love with the idea of being able to be the voice for that child. And for 18 and a half years, that is what I've done. I have spent 18 and a half years getting the training, the on-the-job training to be in that courtroom, to learn that room, to know everything that needs to be learned about that room so that this way, if I am lucky enough and privileged enough to earn the vote of the citizens of this county and this circuit to take a bench come January of 2021, that I'm ready on that day to do the work that is necessary, the work that can only be learned and be ready to go on with that on-the-job training. Thank you so much.
Thank you, candidate Vergos. And finally, candidate Ward-Signleton.
The law has always been really a part of my life. My dad was an attorney up in St. Louis until his untimely passing in 2004. So I spent my summers up in St. Louis working in my dad's law office and getting a feel for the law. But also my mother, being a public servant, working for the county for 32 years, also had her law degree. So I saw the practicality of a law degree, of it being able to be used in and out of practice, but ultimately to serve. And so when I went to college, I debated back and forth on, do I want to go to law school now? I have a business degree from Florida State and really gained an interest in business. But then again, my dad passed away while I was an undergrad. So I came back to this area again because my heart is in service, and worked at the Department of Veterans Affairs before deciding to go to law school, and being able to combine that love of the law with the love of business while getting my JD MBA, and have been able to represent individuals and businesses throughout my career.
Thank you, candidate Ward-Signleton. For the next question, we'll start with candidate Ward-Signleton. Who has been the greatest inspiration in your personal and professional life?
My mother has been my greatest inspiration, my greatest motivator, coming from very humble beginnings, where she is one of 15 children and the first to go away to college, and seeing what an education did for her and how she just persevered, coming from essentially nothing to getting to where she is today, where she's retired and really living her best life. But she has been my true inspiration, my motivation, my encouragement, and everything to me. And she has certainly gotten me where I am today. But it's really her hard work and perseverance that has taught me to be the woman that I am today.
Thank you, candidate Ward-Signleton. Next, candidate Frayman.
Thank you, Christina. On a personal level, my father-in-law, who unfortunately passed away many years ago, is absolutely a personal inspiration for me. He's a man that I really respect, and I set him on a pedestal. To me, what he did for the people around him was he elevated them. He always got them to see themselves in their best light and encouraged them to seek to achieve the best version of themselves. And that's something that I'll never forget from a personal inspiration. From a professional inspiration, I think that one's pretty easy. 28 years of marriage to a woman who is an emergency physician, and putting herself out there in harm's way every day with a work ethic that is bar none the strongest I've ever seen. You can't help but go to work when you live and love a person like that every day. And she inspires me to be better, to do better, to work harder, and there's no one like her.
Thank you, candidate Frayman. Next, candidate Jack.
From a personal perspective, I would have to say my grandmother. She was one of 14 very poor children. She put herself through nursing school, the only one to graduate with any kind of degree. She was pure compassion. She would give you the shirt off her back. We would be driving and she'd pick up anybody anywhere and ask them where they were going. Probably not a safe thing to do, but she judged no one. And I have great respect for her outlook on life. And she trusted that God would provide and everything would go the right way. In my professional career, I would have to say Judge Susan Bucklew. I was a federal law clerk for Judge Bucklew. She's a very well-respected federal judge. She is tough as nails in the courtroom. There is no misunderstanding who is in control of that courtroom. She manages her docket. She makes the correct legal rulings. She's a brilliant legal mind. But knowing her well personally, she is also a very warm and compassionate person. And she is definitely the jurist that I would, among others, who I would very much like to emulate if I'm fortunate enough to be elected. Thank you.
Thank you, candidate Jack. And finally, candidate Vergos.
Thank you. The greatest inspiration to me, definitely one of them at least, would have to be my mother. I was born in Greece. My parents are Greek. We moved to the United States when I was about 8 years old, and my parents worked very hard to do that, to get us to the United States. My mother worked extremely hard to get us to the United States because she believed that it was a better life and a better opportunity for education and career. And she did that by working many, many hours in restaurants to financially be able to make that move. She taught me perseverance, and that is something that I will always take with me. In 2011, I had a little boy who radically changed my entire world and has been the most incredible inspiration to me. He makes me want to change the world. He keeps me focused and balanced, and he would undoubtedly be the most incredible single inspiration in my life. Thank you.
Thank you, candidate Vergos. For our next question, we'll start with candidate Vergos. What do you think can be done to ensure all people who appear before you receive equal justice?
In 2018, there was a House bill that passed that was to create a database for the collection of and the maintaining of information regarding the types of crimes that were being committed, the people who were committing them, the bonds that were being assigned to those offenses, and the type of sentences that were ultimately being issued to the people. This database has not yet gone live. However, the information has been gathered for that database. That is just one example of the way that the state can afford information to the court so that the court can then utilize that information to make a just decision going forward. As a circuit court judge, I would take all of the information available to me to make a decision that is based solely on the facts and the evidence and the rule of law, and not based on any one litigant's opinions or influences or anything other than what the law requires. Thank you.
Thank you, Candidate Vergos. Next, Candidate Ward-Signleton.
In addition to what candidate Vergos had mentioned regarding maintaining a database to make sure things are done consistently, I think it also goes back to preparation and listening and truly going through the law and reading the law and understanding the law, and making so that way you know it's being applied consistently, making sure you look objectively at all of the facts and not just skimming over things, and looking deeply at everything to ensure that you're looking objectively and you considered everything in order to make that objective and fair and consistent finding.
Thank you, Candidate Ward-Signleton. Next, Candidate Frayman.
Clearly, we need to do a better job on transparency, and the database helps with that. But I think there's a bigger problem. I think we need to train judges on recognizing implicit bias and figuring out ways to root that out. I think one way, not necessarily by specific training, but one way we can help to root that out is by ensuring that judges invest the necessary time in their communities. Because you need to know and meet people where they are in order to get an understanding of context, so that when those people are before you, you're not judging them in a judicial bubble. And I think sometimes judges hide behind that robe a little bit too much, and we need to make sure they get out of the courtroom and they get to know the communities in which they're serving, and that's really important. I think I've done that throughout my career, and I would continue to do that as a judge.
Thank you, Candidate Frayman. And finally, Candidate Jack.
Thanks. Well, it seems everyone wants to talk about criminal sentencing, and you have to remember that circuit court judges may be assigned to very many other areas of the law. But if we're talking about criminal sentencing, then practically, I have the courtroom and trial experience to follow the law. And as a prosecutor, years of experience evaluating cases, looking at the law, looking at the facts, determining what to charge based on what the law allows, not what I think should happen and not what my heart or my gut is telling me. And of course, judges need to rely on their heart and the gut when it calls for discretion, but they also have to follow the law, have to have practical experience doing that. Personally, my work in the social services field has given me training and tools for self-reflection and learning how to do that. I think that's a lifelong process. I'm engaged in it presently with everything that's going on. I'm willing to do that uncomfortable work and look at those things, and I will continue to do that. There are professional groups doing that right now. The ABA it said they'll dedicate the upcoming year to an examination of these issues. And the National Judicial College has week-long conferences on implicit bias for judges. And I'm excited, should I be elected, to take a week and go to those types of events to learn and grow as a person to benefit the citizens in my courtroom. Thank you.
Thank you, Candidate Jack. For our next question, we'll start with Candidate Jack. Why do you want to be a judge in a circuit court?
Well, my career has always been about public service, and I believe that we should fulfill our highest purpose. I've spent so much time gaining trial and courtroom experience, and our judges must have that experience. They must know procedure like it's sector, and they're the ones controlling the flow of the courtroom. Dockets are massive. The only way that justice will be served for our citizens to have experienced judges who can manage all those practical things in a courtroom in order to make the best decisions and the legally correct decisions. Now, at this juncture in my career, I finally feel ready. I would not have felt ready 10, 15 years ago, but now I'm ready to serve in a more impactful way to better help our citizens as I've been helping them throughout my career. Thank you.
Thank you, Candidate Jack. Next, Candidate Vergos.
Million people in Pinellas and Pasco counties, and there are 69 judges. Of those 69 judges, 46 are circuit court judges. So you have 46 people who are making the decisions for essentially 1.5 million people when it comes to things involving their families and their money, their freedom. And I have been in front of a lot of really great judges, and I have been in front of some who I've learned other things from. But I believe that these 1.5 million people in Pasco and Pinellas counties deserve the best options for these 46 positions. I have spent 18.5 years learning all of the necessary tools to be that best option for them at this point. I have the courtroom experience that is necessary to take that position going forward, and I am asking for your vote so that I continue to serve the public in the way that I have been going forward as a circuit court judge.
Thank you, Candidate Vergos. Next, Candidate Ward-Signleton.
I want to be a circuit court judge to continue to serve the residents of Pinellas County and Pasco County. I think my diverse professional background, having dealt with individuals and businesses, and also having an MBA, would strengthen our judiciary, which is predominantly prosecutors and public defenders. I think having that helps further serve the residents of Pinellas and Pasco counties, because attorneys are no longer generalists anymore. The judges have to rely on the expertise of others when they are faced with something they don't know. It's even with all of the years of experience, the law is constantly evolving and changing. So recognizing when you don't know something and can rely on your fellow colleagues is essential as well. So I think my diverse professional background strengthens the Sixth Circuit and further helps to serve the community in which we're reaching, which is Pinellas and Pasco County residents.
Thank you, Candidate Ward-Signleton. And finally, Candidate Frayman.
Thank you. For me, service as a judge would be the idealized professional version of myself. It's literally the marriage of my love of the law with my love of service. And for me, that would be the best version of my professional self. As a litigator, and you've heard several of the candidates tonight talk about their roles in the courtroom and how extensive their experience is. But for a litigator to give up that role as the person arguing and championing their client's cause and giving up that, become essentially the most important listener in the room, requires somebody who is capable of setting aside their ego and setting aside any personal biases that they may have and ruling on the facts and the law in front of them. And I've spent 25 years putting together an experience on both sides of the V to ensure as best as I could that that bias and that potential prejudice will not be present in my courtroom.
Thank you, Candidate Frayman. For the next question, we'll start with Candidate Frayman. How would you ensure that pro se parties receive a fair hearing in your court?
It's the respect and the patience that we've talked about throughout this dialogue. It's important that pro se litigants have to voice their concerns and plead their case in court. And while obviously as judges, we cannot provide legal advice to pro se litigants, but we can be patient and give them the opportunity to present in the way that they can present. We can refer them to resources that are available and should be available to assist them. But at the end of the day, we have to decide the case, the rule of law. And sometimes that may be more difficult for a pro se litigant to establish their case, but you have to do what's right under the law. And the judge has to play a very fine line there, or walk a very fine line to ensure that there is fairness, but that there is also justice and the rule of law.
Thank you, candidate Frayman. Next, candidate Jack.
Thanks. Well, pro se defendants really aren't that unusual in our courtrooms. Individual citizens have the right to an attorney, but you've all heard the expression that anyone who has himself for a lawyer has a fool for a lawyer. Judges must ensure that procedures are followed, and they also must ensure that defendants, again, won't necessarily be criminal law, could be family, could be civil, but they need to make sure that criminal defendants' constitutional rights are followed and respected. So it's a balance, and a defendant has a constitutional right to represent himself. So judges must make sure that defendants adhere to the rules of procedure, that they're well informed, that they understand they have the right to an attorney, and throughout the process, they make sure their rights are protected and let them proceed at their own risk and not become an advocate for the defendant, but just protect their rights. Thank you.
Thank you, candidate Jack. Next, candidate Vergos.
Pro se litigants are a thing of the courtroom, as I spoke about earlier, whether it's the result of financial issues or any other issue. Pro se litigants are something that a circuit court judge would absolutely have to work with. There are resources for pro se litigants. I do intend to utilize those resources and allow them to have the opportunity to have an attorney either appointed to them or taken on by them in some form. There's also standby counsel that is available to the court and that is available for pro se litigants, and I would intend to offer standby counsel to pro se litigants for the purposes of at least helping them to navigate through the system. Those are some of the resources that I would allow and that I would afford to the pro se parties. Other than that, I believe that listening to the litigants, paying attention, and giving them their due time, whether they're speaking on their own behalf or whether an attorney is speaking on their behalf, is something that is important and something that I would absolutely afford to every party in my courtroom. Thank you.
Thank you, candidate Vergos. And finally, candidate Ward-Signleton.
Thank you. Pro se parties are something that's going to be present at all levels of court, county court, circuit court, as well as the federal court level. During my federal clerkship, we were often seeing pro se plaintiffs and indigent parties come in, and I admired the way that my judge handled those cases and ensuring that those pro se parties had their ability to be heard while not providing legal advice, affording some leniency in pleadings and things like that to allow them to make amendments to be heard, but also reminding them that there are rules that have to be followed. The rules of the court still must be followed if they're choosing to represent themselves, and then also making them aware of the resources available to them through the court system and within the community, I think are all very, very important. But should they choose to represent themselves, making sure they have that ability to be heard while also respecting the rules of the court.
Thank you, candidate Ward-Signleton. For the next question, we'll start with candidate Ward-Signleton. What is the greatest challenge to the judiciary in Florida's state courts, and how do you think it should be remedied?
I think presently the greatest challenge is the backlog that the judiciary is going to face in light of recent events in all areas, from criminal law to foreclosures and evictions. People are losing businesses, so there may be business disputes that are coming in. So I think there's going to be a huge backlog that we're going to have to face, but also making sure that backlog doesn't become too great by using the technological infrastructure we have in place to keep cases moving as far as we can at this point, by doing Zoom meetings and virtual and telephonic hearings. I do hearings every week on Zoom with courts throughout the state of Florida, and making sure the cases continue to move forward until we can get back to or adjust to a new normal. So utilizing the technological infrastructure that we have to deal with the current backlog, but not letting it get too far out of control.
Thank you, candidate Ward-Signleton. Next, candidate Frayman.
Sure. I think that absolutely the greatest challenge is the COVID environment, but even before COVID, and I was having a conversation with an attorney earlier today, even before COVID, we had a time problem. It takes months to get 15 minutes before a judge in most civil courtrooms. That seems absurd to most of us. And why is that happening? And what can we do to fix that? And I think we need an investment of resources, not just technology, but financial resources. You have to remember the judiciary is about 1% or slightly under 1% of our entire state budget. For a quote unquote co-equal branch of government, that leaves us pretty much a twig by comparison to the legislature and the executive. So while judges need to work smarter and harder in order to clear out this backlog, we're going to need some help. And that's going to come from our private attorneys. It's going to come from our public defenders. It's going to come from our state attorney's offices. Everyone's going to need to get on board with basically maybe a sea change in the way in which we handle cases so that we can move forward efficiently and economically if we're not going to get those resources.
Thank you, candidate Frayman. Next, candidate Jack.
Absolutely. Even before COVID, resources have just been stretched too thin. Now with COVID, there's a huge backlog of cases that need to be dealt with. And if you think about all of the economic effects of that, it's affecting the settlement of cases. It's affecting strategic decisions with how attorneys pursue their cases. And what the way that, and also with criminal cases, there are constitutional reasons that technology and Zoom can be used to address their court hearings. It has to be done in person. So once courtrooms are opened up, we are going to need trial-ready judges with courtroom experience. This isn't a situation where judges should be learning on the job regardless, but especially now, it's going to be from all the town meetings I've participated in, all hands on deck, judges handling each other's calendars, judges handling each other's trials, passing cases to try and reduce that backlog. And it's going to be having judges who can quickly make and efficiently make the correct legal decision in their cases. Thank you.
Thank you, candidate Jack. And finally, candidate Vergos.
I absolutely agree with my colleagues in their sentiments regarding the backlog and the resources that are available to the judiciary. The COVID situation has certainly increased the backlog that, as everyone has already indicated, and I would agree with, the backlog existed long before COVID-19 and before the COVID-19 crisis. I've spent months at the state now working with the defense bar to try and alleviate some of that as far as the criminal clientele is concerned. But As you have already heard, there is so many other aspects of the circuit court bench that are going to be compromised as a result of this. And so definitely being ready to handle the caseload when we take that job, and being ready from having the experience that we need in order to get to that courtroom is going to be necessary, because this is definitely a time where efficiency is going to be important. Preparedness is going to be vital, and the experience of that room is going to be unmatched. Thank you.
Thank you, Candidate Vergos. For our next question, we'll start with Candidate Vergos. Describe your legal experience, including practice areas and whether you handle litigation.
My legal experience is of 18 and a half years. I was admitted to practice in February of 2002. I have been with the Office of the State Attorney for Bernie McCabe since that time. During that time, I spent about 13 months in county court, where I handled misdemeanor cases involving batteries and driving under the influence, etc. And then I spent the rest of the time in circuit court. In 2003, I was promoted to circuit court, and I started working on felony cases. And circuit court is the court that we are seeking these positions in now. As a circuit court attorney, as a felony attorney, I've handled thousands of cases, ranging from thefts to homicide. About 10 years of that time, I handled cases with special victims, which included child victims of sexual abuse, molestation, neglect, and ultimately, at times, murder. Those times and those years prepared me in ways that no other position, I don't believe, can prepare you to take these jobs, to take this next step. As a supervisor in the state attorney's office, I manage an entire felony division, and I manage the attorneys in that division. So I review everything from their filing decisions all the way to their plea negotiations, motions, trials, etc. I have over 110 jury trials at this point, which is trials that are in a court in front of a jury that I have chosen the jury for and have presented the case to through duration. I have devoted my career to getting ready for this next step of my career, and to getting ready to be the judge that this circuit needs and that this circuit deserves. And I welcome the opportunity to serve in that fashion come January of 2021. Thank you.
Thank you, Candidate Vergos. Next, Candidate Ward-Signleton.
Thank you. I've been practicing just over 9 years. I started my practice after leaving Stetson College of Law, representing insurance companies and third parties in auto property damage cases, uninsured motorist, bodily injury, and a gambit of cases at all levels, from the beginning of litigation and the inception through trial. And then I went, as we were doing more cases in federal court, learning to want to litigate in all tribunals, not just in state court, but being able to litigate in federal court. And what better learning experience than to work for a federal judge, and had the opportunity to do that. And then came back, learned a new practice area that was in litigation and employment law, dealing with wage and hour claims, harassment claims, discrimination claims, representing various businesses, primarily in federal court, some in state court during that time as well. And then presently getting a different lens of litigation, learning what it's like to represent the plaintiffs and represent the individuals, and not only be able to carry the burden, but also having defended cases as well. So having seen both sides of litigation, I think has given me a unique experience. And presently involved in significant litigation dealing with, because 97% of civil cases don't go to trial. They are disposed of prior to trial. So while trial experience is incredibly important, being able to manage that docket and being able to work through all of the other proceedings that lead up to trial is also important. And I've done all of those proceedings leading up to trial as well. Again, from dispositive motions, case management, and all of the different gambits of litigation, I have handled all ranges from both sides of it. So that's effectively my litigation experience and law experience. And also, I'm teaching trial advocacy at the #1 trial school in the country. So, just to add on to my legal expertise is just being able to now usher in the next generation of lawyers as well.
Thank you, candidate Ward-Signleton. Next, candidate Frayman.
Thank you. I started my career in Miami at White & Case, one of the largest international law firms with a headquarters in this. And I practiced primarily in federal court doing sophisticated intellectual property litigation as well as employment law litigation. From there, when my wife graduated medical school, we moved up to Jacksonville, and I took a position with a labor and employment boutique firm, practicing both sides, plaintiff and defense, and employment law litigation in both state and federal courts. I then went on to an insurance defense firm where I practiced primarily medical malpractice, but also family law, which is an interesting mix. And it was a lot of fun because I got to work hand in hand with my wife as she helped me to translate that assisted me with my cases. From Jacksonville, we moved home to Pinellas County, where my wife grew up. And after a short stint as an in-house counsel and unfortunately not entirely successful solo practice, I joined my former firm, Harper Kynes, at the time, Geller and Buford. By the time I left it, Harper Kynes, Geller, Greenleaf, and Freeman, which was a general practice law firm in which I practiced general civil litigation, which included employment law, business litigation, which involved a lot of shareholder disputes and business litigation, as well as family law. And I continued that practice for many years until I ultimately left the firm to effectively to run for judge. Throughout my career, with the exception of the couple of stints as in-house counsel, I was always a litigator and have always been in the courtroom working my cases. So I hope that answers the question.
Thank you, candidate Frayman. And finally, candidate Jack.
Thanks. As I mentioned, I was a paralegal in Chicago for a sole practitioner who he handled employment discrimination cases, medical malpractice. Then I went to law school at the University of Chicago, which is known as the School of Law and Economics. Definitely a place where a lot of really creative legal theory is born, and it massively changed the way that I think and analyze situations. In law school, I did numerous internships, the U.S. Attorney's Office, the Cook County State Attorney's Office, Mayer Brown and Platt, a very large law firm, and also the Office of Legal Counsel in D.C., which advises the White House on legal matters. I then did a federal clerkship in Tampa. And one thing about federal judges and federal judges are almost always in chambers. Most federal practice is on paper. State court is very different. In state court, judges are in court often all day long, making decisions, ruling based on oral arguments. And most motions aren't even briefed in state court. I then went to work at the Hillsborough State Attorney's Office. I worked for Mark Ober, who was then the state attorney. He has endorsed me and is with my campaign. And then I moved to and worked for Bernie McCabe in Pinellas, who has also endorsed me. I went through a divorce and I had young children in a conflict situation, and I needed to know more about co-parenting. The family law was changing. It was 2008. I went back to school for psychology. I studied family law, parenting coordination, mediation, and I ended up working full-time at USF St. Petersburg, bringing co-parenting service families in South St. Pete, working at mental health projects, and bringing mental health services into the dependency system for families there. I then went to prosecuting for Mr. McCabe. I'm the first attorney he's ever hired back in 20 something years. He believes once you leave the office that you should not come back, and he thought highly enough of me to do that, and for that I'm grateful. And that is your little synopsis of. Thank you.
Thank you, Candidate Jack. For our final question, we'll start with Candidate Jack. Describe your philosophy of the judicial role.
Well, a judge must have command of the courtroom. A judge must be trial ready and expert in procedure, and they must be ready, willing to rule quickly and correctly. A judge must have conviction and courage to withstand pressure from others, whether it's political pressure from the media, just from participants in the courtroom who want to do things a certain way, from attorneys. We all know attorneys can be pushy, who to take over. Judges must be very respectful, and I feel that that's naturally part of my personality of everyone, but they have to control the courtroom. They cannot give every emotional person in the courtroom carte blanche to speak at length about an issue that may or may not be relevant. So they have to have the experience to know what's relevant, know when the time is to allow certain things to happen in the courtroom, and keep the cases flowing, or it is not going to help with that backlog, and it is not going to ensure justice for any of our citizens. Thank you.
Thank you, Candidate Jack. Next, Candidate Vergos.
I think that the philosophy, or my philosophy of judicial role, is one of fairness and impartiality. A judge has to be fair and impartial in listening to the facts and the evidence and applying that law in a manner that is consistent with the facts and the evidence and not based on anything other than that. I believe that it is important for the judge to protect the rights of all the people that appear in that courtroom, to protect the rights of the parties, of the defendants, of the victims, of the litigants, and to ensure that those rights are protected. And it is important to be able to do that by being able to make timely and wise decisions about what is going on, about the evidence that is being presented, to be making timely decisions that maintains the efficiency of that courtroom. Because as we've already heard, the backlog of that courtroom is so bad at this point that we need judges who can make those decisions in a way that will provide for fairness and efficiency to all of the parties represented. I believe that part of my judicial philosophy is one of incredible respect, not only for the people who appear in front of me, but for my other fellow judges and for the work that is being done in that room, and to afford every person the ability to be heard inside of that courtroom. Thank you.
Thank you, Candidate Vergos. Next, Candidate Ward-Signleton.
My judicial philosophy is one of service and reminding that as a judge, you are a public servant and you are here to serve this community and to make sure the citizens of this community, when they come before the court, are heard and are heard fairly, and they are listened to. And again, there also needs to be a maintenance of order within the court. So it is the judge's role to respect the litigants, respect the attorneys, and respect the judiciary as a whole, by maintaining order, but also by effectively listening, applying the law, and looking objectively at all of the facts and the law and applying that law consistently so that every member of this community that becomes before the court has their opportunity to be heard, because ultimately judges are the ultimate public servants, and they are servants to the legal profession and to the community as a whole.
Thank you, Candidate Ward-Signleton. And finally, candidate Frayman.
Thank you. I like to think of the judge as the listener in chief. And you've got to listen with the intent to understand, not with the intent to respond. And so many litigators don't know how to do that. And that's why they're best serving their clients as litigators and not seeking the judicial position. If you're seeking this, you need to be able to set aside your ego, and you need to be able to be an impartial. And when your entire experience base comes from one position and one side of the V, that can be very difficult. I've spent my entire career cultivating objectivity by representing clients in all aspects of so many different legal matters. And I'm certain that I'm the only candidate in my race who has the substantive experience in the role in which we are most likely to serve. We're going to be family court judges when we're elected. And I'm the only one who has tried a family law case and handled numerous family law cases throughout his career. And substantive experience matters. It's not just knowing the rules of procedure. It's also knowing the substantive law. And I think that I bring that to bear in order that I can be decisive, because again, that's another element of my philosophy as a judge, decisive in order to be efficient.
Thank you, candidate Frayman, and thank you, candidates, for your answers. Next, we'll move on to the closing statements. As a reminder, the order of the candidates' closing remarks was determined by drawing straws. We'll begin with candidate Ward-Signleton.
Thank you. Over the course of my career, I have diversified my professional background, as discussed, representing both sides, plaintiffs and defendants, individuals and businesses, in various civil matters, some of which we discussed: employment discrimination, harassment claims, insurance claims, property claims, bodily injury claims. But by representing both sides, I've developed the skill of analyzing all sides of a case objectively. And additionally, as having clerked for a federal judge, I gained exposure to a multitude of other practice areas, which further developed my ability to think and write objectively and simply apply the law to the facts, which are essential to the roles as a judge. As mentioned, attorneys are no longer generalists, so having a background in civil litigation and other business and contract related matters would further strengthen our judiciary by adding a different professional perspective. Again, a large percentage of our judiciary are former prosecutors and public defenders, and we need diversity of professional background and experience that other judges can call upon when they're faced with an issue of law, which they may not have faced before. And additionally, I've developed myself as a leader within this community. I'm a graduate of Leadership St. Pete. I've served on the planning committee since I've graduated. I'm also intimately connected with the community in which we would serve. I'm vice chair of the Board of Trustees of Mount Moriah Christian Fundamental Academy. I'm also involved in other service organizations. And as a graduate of Stetson College of Law, I've come full circle now, and I'm an adjunct professor of trial advocacy. Creating that next generation of lawyers that will, most of whom serve this community. And so as a leader and native of Pinellas County, along with my professional qualifications to serve on the bench, I can further enhance that relationship with the community and the judiciary. And I look forward to your support on August 18th. Thank you.
Thank you, candidate Ward-Signleton. Next, candidate Vergos.
Thank you. And thank you for this opportunity tonight, for this forum and for hosting this forum. It's so important to have the voters be knowledgeable and understand what it is that they're voting for when they go to the ballots or when they fill in those absentee ballots come election day. As a circuit court judge, I will maintain the integrity of the courtroom and the safety and the security for all the citizens of the 6th Judicial Circuit. For more than 19 years, as an assistant state attorney, I have consistently sought justice and protected the rights of vulnerable citizens. I have successfully handled thousands of criminal cases, including homicides, crimes against children, fraud, domestic violence, to name a few. And when I say handled, it's important to understand that I mean from conception to conclusion. That includes everything from the filing decisions, the emotions that come along with it, the negotiation with the defense bar, the pre-trials that go forth in these cases, and then ultimately, if necessary, a trial. I have 116 jury trials as of now, as of today. I am the only person that is running for a circuit court judge at this point that can say that. As opposed to my opponent, I have well over, as I indicated, 100 jury trials, which is an important distinction to be made because that is where you gain the courtroom experience that is necessary to make those necessary decisions as a judge, to make the decisions regarding what the evidence code means, to make the decisions regarding what the litigants need. And those decisions can only be made after having the right and the proper hands-on experience, which I have had through the course of my career. In this race, as I said, experience matters, and the residents of the Sixth Circuit deserve a circuit court judge who's ready to handle the demands of the bench from the very first day. As a veteran prosecutor, I've appeared in court on almost daily basis. I maintain for the last 9 years, I have maintained a circuit court division and have oversaw that circuit court division and the attorneys that are practicing in it. I have been in that courtroom almost every single day during that time period, doing the work that is necessary. The outside of the courtroom, I can tell you that I am a mother to an 8-year-old little boy. I am a Odyssey of the Mind coach. I have coached his baseball team. I am involved in my community. I'm involved in my church. And I believe that service to the community is as important as it is inside of the courtroom as it is outside of the courtroom. I welcome your vote and I seek your vote on August 18th. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Candidate Vergos. Next, Candidate Jack.
Thank you for being here. You are smart to care about our judicial races. You may never appear in circuit court, but if you do, the stakes will likely be very high. A circuit judge has the ability to take away your property, your liberty, your children, and in some cases, even your life. You are on the day you're in circuit court, you are going to care a lot about your judge's experience. You are not going to want them to be learning on the job in your case. And I'm the only candidate in my group with the trial and courtroom experience we must demand of our circuit judges. Teaching trial theory is one thing, and it's kind of interesting. I've never heard of Stetson who's seen one case to verdict to teach trial advocacy. Years of daily courtroom experience that trains someone to know what and how to rule. I have the common sense and the good judgment when discretion's called for, which is why I've gotten the support in my campaign I have. It is that experience that will protect your rights as a citizen. Community service is great and it's nice for everyone. We should all be doing it. But frankly, what matters in a courtroom for a circuit judge is trial and courtroom experience. With COVID, we do have this huge backlog of cases. We need experienced courtroom attorneys to help deal with that. Also, I found in psychology to understand the effects of trauma and what that looks like so I can keep an open mind for defendants who have been affected in that way and for families who are suffering. As voters, you should look at endorsements too. I have people in the community like T. Grizzard, who's on the board of Leadership St. Pete, and also my current and former lawyers. I also have extensive attorney endorsements from families throughout all fields, family, probate, criminal, civil. They know that courtroom and trial experience is critically important for their cases to go the right way. And they know that judges from years of experience in the courtroom, they know that judges who don't come to court at the beginning with that experience never catch up. As a prosecutor, I also have a lot of experience to stay strong under pressure, and I have not filed countless cases you'll never hear about. I don't bow to pressure from judges, victims, defense attorneys, or law enforcement, and I've shown courage doing the right thing and following the law. It is judges with courtroom experience and the courage to stand by their conviction in following the law that protects all of our rights as citizens. And that's why I ask you to vote for Elizabeth Liz Jack on your ballot on August 18th. Thank you.
Thank you, candidate Jack. And finally, candidate Frayman.
Thank you, Christina. They call it the practice of law for a reason. We're always practicing, we're always learning. Over 24 years of my career, or after 24 years of my career, I decided to try something new and learn a new area of law. And I joined the public defender in August of last year. And that's something we want to see out of our judges. It's that willingness to learn and that humility to know that we don't know everything. Through my experience at the public defender's office, I've had trials in just the last 11 months. And I believe I'm the only candidate in my race who has both civil jury trial experience and criminal jury trial experience. So let there be no question, I'm prepared for the role. But the diversity of experience is what's important. I've represented both sides throughout my career, whether that's plaintiffs or defendants, husbands, doctors, injured patients. I understand what it means to look at a case objectively, not always through the same lens that I've been looking at it through for 20 years. I also have neutral training as a mediator in both circuit civil and family law. I have spent my entire career establishing my credentials as a neutral and impartial. In order for us to ensure equal justice, we need to eliminate bias. We need to put judges on the bench who have a diversity of experience and understand that there are two sides to every story. And oftentimes, the truth lies somewhere in between. And it's the role of the judge and the parties and their counsel to work through the issues to find that truth and find justice as best that we can. I believe that my personality, my temperament, and my experience make me the best candidate for Group 28, and I'm asking for your vote on August 18th. Thank you.
Thank you, candidate Frayman. And thank you, candidates. In closing, I would like to remind you of our upcoming deadlines for the primary elections. Voter registration for the August 18th primary closes July 20th. Early voting runs from August 8th through August 15th. Election Day is August 18th. Please consider your voting backup plan and register now to vote by mail. Please mail your ballot at least 1 week before Election Day. A recording of this forum with closed captioning will be available on Facebook at the League of Women Voters St. Petersburg area site soon. Thank you for joining us.
Again, thank you so much for joining us this evening at the Institute for Strategic Policy Solutions. I trust that you enjoyed this robust debate. Remember that the primaries are coming up soon. Every vote counts. On July 23rd, we have yet another forum with the Pinellas County School Board, and we're excited to have Bay News 9 former commentator Al Rochelle. We look forward to having you then and learning more about the many issues that our community is going to have to address in the coming months. To learn more about the Institute for Strategic Policy Solutions, ISPS, please go to our Facebook page. Have a wonderful night.